Hello everybody and welcome back to Victoria 3, our Dev Diary series on Dev Diary number 2, Capacities. I would have posted this probably a few days ago, back when the Dev Diary actually released, but I was on vacation with the family in Disneyland, so of course I wasn't able to do this specific recording, but I've gone over it several times and I do have some thoughts on it. And so of course, it's all about capacities, or so-called currencies, that the whole dev team is calling it in a way. There's four currencies, it seems like. So of course the first is, you got bureaucracy, and that's sort of like administrative capacity. You got authority, which is basically what it seems to be, the ability for your country to effectively pass laws in a way, so it's a little bit less of an abstract things compared to before. And then you have influence, of course, which is sort of diplo reputations, or diplomatic influence, like you had back in Victoria 2, except a little bit different in some ways we'll get into. And of course the last, you kind of saw it a little bit in the Dev Diary pictures, but it looks like it's just currency, actual currency, the amount of money that your country actually makes. And so of course, let's jump into the first one. So bureaucracy. Bureaucracy appears to simply be the amount, it's like they compared it to sort of government capacity, or administrative capacity in Stellaris in a way. And so it makes sense because in Victoria 2, of course, you had the bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats were sort of, they helped with, as far as tax efficiency goes, you would increase administrative spending, and you can go ahead and fight crime per se. And even in colonies, if you had 1% of the colony had bureaucrat pops that were of an accepted culture, you can go ahead and incorporate them as an actual state in your nation. It appears that bureaucracy is less of just bureaucrats and actually a more specific tab, or a more specific currency. So of course they're trying to shy away from a little bit from mana, it seems like, which I do applaud them with, such as like admin points or diplo points, or what's the other one? Admin points, military points, there we go. And so it's a little bit of a different take on it. It's less abstract as you just kind of gain random points, but there's a little bit more of a base to it. And so of course bureaucracy appears to, it does mention a little bit about the fact you're going to be founding a administrative or a bureaucratic building. So it looks like there might be more buildings involved in Victoria 3 compared to Victoria 2. Because Victoria 2 you had provisional buildings, sort of, and they were either naval bases, forts, railroads, factories, and usually just those four type of buildings. But it seems like there might be some more administrative buildings that your nation can build to help increase the amount of just whether it's the currencies or capacities that your country has. And so that's a little bit interesting. It's a little bit of a divergence from Victoria 2. In fact, pretty much all of this stuff that's being introduced in this Dev Diary is completely new compared to Victoria 2, albeit there are some similarities. And so of course it looks like, of course, bureaucracy has a direct influence on taxation. And so it's good to make sure that you have bureaucracy, because if you expand too quick, and this does make sense, your nation might not be able to handle the influx of territories. This also, an interesting thing, is that in Victoria 2, there was a specific strategy that if you were a minor nation, you would go ahead and take some land from China. You would take some states from China. And with those new states, you would suddenly have a population that's 40 times its original size, and create a ton of soldiers and conquer the world that way. This sort of capacity for bureaucracy completely nulls that strategy, as you would not be able to, as a small nation, support the kind of population that, for example, China would have. And so this is a completely new thing, which I do enjoy, that they're putting into the game simply for that reason, to make it a little bit less gamey per se, and a little bit more realistic as far as what countries are able to do. And so of course perhaps you can go ahead and conquer China, but you would have to have a massive bureaucracy to be able to handle it as soon as you gain the territory. Otherwise, I assume there would be discontent among the populace. Your country would perhaps go bankrupt because your bureaucrats can no longer tax effectively. And among other things, of course, there's also Some other modifiers it does say here. It does seem that your pops have a sort of impact on your bureaucracy. So of course that makes sense. Similar to how Stellaris was. 5 incorporated states, minus 50. So that's kind of like maybe EU4 had, for example, that every state you would take would have some type of impact on your administrative capacity. So of course, bureaucracy is kind of a evolution of that type of system. So law enforcement, education, of course, are also listed here. And so there's little numbers behind here. So I'm assuming that's perhaps emphasis. It doesn't really go too in depth. It does say in the actual dev diary somewhere about such as education and policy. So of course, there's institutions. So you have institutions, whether education or police, or apparently others. So institutions are being added to the game. That's completely new compared to what Victoria 2 had. And it does kind of make sense because, of course, in political science, for example, you learn about different institutions of government. And of course, it seems like they're trying to incorporate that into the game itself. And so that's a little bit of interesting little rework to doing. And that's about all I really took away from this particular screen. Though you did see a little bit tidbit. You see the flag right here. Of course, it seems to be, I believe they were talking about they were looking at Sweden. Svealand. Actually, that looks like Denmark, isn't it? And so maybe it's little Denmark over here that they're looking at. And then you have those Svealand. Don't quote me on that because I am not sure. There's this little 25 right here, so maybe that's your national ranking. That's what I'm taking out of it, because in Victoria 2, of course, it was kind of a similar position. You would have what your national ranking was next to the flag. And also, it's like all these little windows here are going to be up on the left part of the screen, more following in lines with what recent Victoria or Paradox games have followed. Victoria 2, of course, opened up an entirely new window and put the little informational ledger or whatnot into the middle of the screen. And so, of course, it's a little bit different. Authority is the next thing that they sort of introduced. And authority, of course, seems to come from your leader specifically. And so it seems that your government, your leader has some type of impact. And you can see from the different values. So this, of course, is referencing, looks like probably Denmark again. Their total generation of authority comes from, they have a plus 100% base value. So there's a base value here. From your government forms, plus 200 from oligarchy. So your government form does impact your authority. Your national supremacy is probably more of a focus of your country. So like in Victoria 2, you had order, you had liberty, and then you had, I'm trying to think what the other ones were. Liberty, authority. Was it authority? I know order was in there. But anyways, you have different national focuses like that. And it was like a national policy. And so perhaps that's something similar. Plus 1 from freedom of conscience. So of course that seems like maybe it's probably a modifier or whatnot. And then plus 50 from right of assembly. So maybe those are just like laws. If you pass some laws, they might impact how much authority you have. And then you have from ruler trait. And so your rulers that you have in your country are going to have traits apparently. And so this kind of falls in line with a lot more, maybe not EU4, but perhaps like Imperator Rome, Stellaris, Crusader Kings, obviously that series. There were always ruler traits that were sort of introduced from what type of ruler you had. And so this looks like it's kind of falling in line with that type of system. And all that goes ahead and incorporates into your total amount of authority. And of course, you have your excess authority that seems to impact how effectively you can enact laws. So in Victoria 2, you would have laws enact based off of the amount your ruling house supported a change or enacting a certain policy. You would have, for example, if you wanted to enact higher education laws, you would have to have social reform want percentage, which is usually attributed to by your upper house in your country. Same thing with your populace. They would usually have a social movement they might be part of, and how much of a populace supports a specific law to be passed. And if you don't pass the law, of course, you radicalize some elements of your populace. And if you do pass the law, it de-radicalizes a lot of your populace. And so it looks like this does follow in line a little bit with that. The other thing I noticed here is the fact that there is a expenditure on your authority, and road maintenance seems to be a massive expenditure. I'm not sure what exactly is going into it from this right here. Of course, consumption taxes on liquor. So perhaps if you have more authoritative policies for taxation, for example, it seems that you do require some measure of authority in order to actively or effectively administer some of your policies, specifically taxation in this case. Road maintenance, of course, like I said before, I'm not entirely sure what it has to do with authority, and so perhaps, I'm not sure why. I mean, I feel like that would be more of a monetary thing you have in your country. Maybe there's some maintenance involved with having advanced road systems, not so much authority. So, but maybe, well, I don't know, it says road maintenance. You could be building a road, but that's kind of a vague little thing there that I've noticed. Maybe there's gonna be a little bit more of a explanation on that. And of course, the last little tab here, or currency, was influence. And like I said before, influence seems to be somewhat similar to your amount of diplomatic points you would have as a country in Victoria 2, or the amount of diplomatic influence you had as a country when it came to incorporating other nations into your sphere. And so it seems to be a similar type of system, but there also is another thing. So it looks like infamy is sort of a thing in Victoria 3 as well, except it seems to be identified as threat. So instead of calling it infamy, Victoria 3 seems to call it infamy threat. And of course, there's a natural decay. And instead of a static number for being at peace or at war, I think in Victoria 2, for example, it was... Actually, I did change this in my game, so I'm not entirely sure if this is correct. In my mod, I had it for at negative 0.03 if you're at war, and negative 0.1 if you're at peace. I think it's a little bit different in the base game. I think it's negative 0.05 in the base game and negative 0.01 in the base game as well. Of course, I haven't played the vanilla Victoria 2 in a while, so some of my knowledge of that might be a little bit skewed. But influence does appear to affect or impact your threat decay or your infamy decay. And that's going to be a little bit of an interesting system where your infamy is going to be a little bit more impacted by the amount of what type of, how much influence you have, and perhaps governmental reforms. Because your total generation of influence, of course, from here it says base value is 100. From being a minor power, it's plus 500. And so I'm not sure if it means that you're going to have more. Well, actually it does. In the dev diary, it said that you have more influence based off of what your national rankings are. So great powers, of course, have more influence. And so plus 500 for minor power, I'm assuming that perhaps secondary powers have maybe plus 1,000, or great powers have plus 2,000. You have a lot more influence to spend on countries. And so your total influence here, of course, Norway, personal union. I am starting to think that this is definitely Denmark that we're looking at right here. And then you have Prussia, improved relations. So you have not a set number on diplomatic relations you can have, such as in EU4. It's a little bit more abstract in that way. You can have as much relations with other countries as you could possibly support with your influence, whether from your ruler right here or from law. So landowners, family ties. I'm assuming that's a social policy that perhaps Denmark has in their nation. So instead of maybe going for, instead of landowners, family ties, they might go for more liberal route, maybe focusing more on business owners, nobility, maybe stuff like that, or maybe more on the peasantry. They might impact your amount of influence you have as a nation. And so influence appears to be a more crucial part. And I do actually, looking at all three of these, I am more supportive of this system than, say, EU4, because that was completely random as far as how much admin points you had. Eventually they added, of course, abilities to impact that a little bit more, affect that a little bit more, but it's still a little bit more of an abstract system. This way, it seems you have more impact on how much you can have, and you can sort of work through it a lot easier. So I do appreciate that a lot more, among other things. And of course, you have this little last tab here, or this little last capacity, and that's of course money. And money, I would like to see a little bit more about what money involves, especially when you consider the fact that road maintenance appears to be linked to authority instead of money. So I'm kind of curious about the extent as to all of this and how it impacts everything. But regardless, it seems that Victoria 3 is going in a little bit of a different direction. Victoria 2, of course, adding a lot more detail to your country. And all these capacities seem to add the ability to influence your country a lot more. And so, of course, the rest of this dev diary, that's basically a summary of everything. There's not a whole lot more to delve into. It was rather short, but typically the comment section here has a lot more info as far as what the devs are saying. And so you can look here, you click this little tab and it says show only dev responses. So if you look at here, we can see all the devs and what they were saying. All right, and so the comments here, they go a little bit more in depth as far as some principles here. And so of course, like I said earlier, it seems there's minor powers, but there's also major powers. And so apparently they changed the name of secondary powers to major powers. And so that's a little bit different. And then there are the fact that as far as influence goes, it's a little bit more flexible and influenced by a lot of different factors. So of course, rank, threat, etc. Those sort of things do impact the way that, or how much influence you have. And it seems like the more threats you have, the more influence your nation potentially has as well. And so maybe that's kind of like Imperator Rome, for example. The more, what was it called? Aggressive expansion, or whatever the term was in Imperator Rome you had, the more it would also decrease. And so that could be a little bit of an interesting sort of comparison there. And also they did mention that even you get a lot more authority from being authoritarian, for example. So being an authoritarian, you have a lot more direct influence on your own nation. Being a non-authoritarian, of course, you don't so much get as much ability to sort of dictate how things go. But your pops will end up being happier and wealthier, and that brings its own sort of benefits. And of course, colonial power, they mentioned, is an institution that you end up investing in Victoria 3. And so that's an entirely new thing as well. So of course, we also mentioned earlier there was education, there was enforcement, and of course those are two institutions that Victoria 3 had. Colonial power is also a new institution that they are having. Capacity, obviously, money is just a treasury. That's literally it. And they did mention, and of course we saw this up here, that these bars might be a little bit confusing, but we will get a little bit more information on how those work a little bit later on. And as well, they might actually fix the appearance there, but it does seem that there are loans involved as far as your nation goes, and this seems to be what you're using to pay it off. At least that's what I understood from that little comment. And looks like next week they're going to be delving into buildings instead of capacities. So that might be a little bit interesting to look into. And then, of course, they went into authority a little bit. And so I was a little bit confused about the whole road maintenance aspect in Victoria 3. At least the whole authority right here says road maintenance. And it seems that what they are saying, and perhaps this is a little bit misunderstanding on my part, that it's being used as a decree. So if your ruler, the head of state, is using a decree, a focus on road maintenance, then there you go. That's a little bit of a pet project there that they are influencing, and that's why it's using authority. So it's beyond regular road maintenance and more of the ruler themselves focusing on making sure that that is being attended to. And I know they mentioned a little bit earlier as well, as far as road maintenance goes, that it has some sort of impact between different provinces. So of course, whether it's assimilation speed or whether it's market goods going from one province to another, roads are pretty clear there. And that's why the decree, as a ruler, you might want to focus on road maintenance to make sure that the goods are going from point A to point B much quicker. And so that's kind of what it says right here. Yes, maintaining a good market connections in a few states at a time. More effective means of leveraging your economy to ensure cohesion between your states and our teamwork later in the game. So of course there's other means. Of course you can go ahead and incorporate or try to influence trade between different provinces. There's some other things here, and it does seem that your government type is going to be influencing a lot of different aspect. So it says right here, primarily your rank, which is determined by prestige. So prestige is still a massive value or of importance here in Victoria 3. And it says that, and so of course, the more impressive / terrifying the rest of the world thinks you are, the more leeway you get in pushing your way around on the world stage. So that's why I said earlier that threat seems to impact the amount of influence you get. Hence the question, where do you get influence from? And otherwise, there is this that was a little bit interesting or interested in as well, is that democratic governments should in fact have, and this person was saying, should in fact have close to equal, if not more authority than early game absolute monarchies. And so then they respond that autocrats can do things in a way that cuts through red tape. So basically, the ruler that you have appears to have the ability to, if you're a democratic nation, to sort of cut through a lot, or like bypass a lot of sort of what is normal restrictions. As you have an extremely, or a specifically more powerful ruler in charge of your democracy or government, then they might be able to get a lot more done. Hence the whole authority aspect. And then we have social programs. So of course, governing China is difficult. And what else do we have here? In fact, not too much else. It does seem that you're providing goods for a specific population. So if you're providing education to 1 million people, it's a flat increase. So 10 times, not an exponential increase. So that's going to be a value there. And that's basically it from all of these dev comments I found. It looks like they mostly focus it on only responding to comments within about the first few hours of the Dev Diaries release. And so it's a little bit interesting to go through all of those. But anyways, that basically sums up the entire whole Dev Diary number 2. And so there's a few things we do learn here. A lot of the systems that they are introducing are completely different than what Victoria 2 offered. So there's a lot of new stuff here, and of course there's probably a lot of nuances to it. And there's a little bit of some vagueness to it as well. Perhaps some others are able to glean a little bit more information from it than I can. But I'm excited to see where things continue to go, and we'll find out next week a little bit more about buildings, it appears. So we're looking forward to that. So yeah, let's say here that that's all for today. And of course, they're going to be discussing buildings next week. So that's about it for Dev Diary number 2. So anyways, thank you guys all for watching, and we'll just continue to stay updated as far as what Victoria 3 is looking like. So anyways, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye. As always, please leave a like down below and consider subscribing if you would like to see more content just like this, more frequent uploads. If you have any suggestions, go ahead and leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys next time.